Let's just sit in the order that we're on.
Okay, so
Oh,
we're
now everyone knows.
okay. So,
Good. Wherever you want. Oh. It's too loud.
Well, it's nice to still see some of you here.
Surprised.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to be here, especially after the exciting day that we've had. And, well, we have the honor of having the closing panel, and we promise you that hopefully you will not want to leave, because we are going to give you quite good value for your money for the next hour and a half. I think most of the day focused very much on the important role that Slovakia has played in both its historic past, but also in joining the European Union. And we've had many positive statements about the importance of becoming a member of the Union and the importance that Slovakia has played in actually pushing and providing a new industrial part of that union to Europe. Clearly there are issues around growth, competitiveness, and jobs, and we've heard about all those issues. And what we're going to try to do in this panel is to talk about some of what was mentioned by Vice President Šefčovič, but also by your Prime Minister, which is how do we actually balance the goals of the European Union around decarbonization and climate action? And how do we continue to also grow and to invest in what we're calling a new energy union? The idea of an energy union was actually proposed by Prime Minister Tusk of Poland. And many of us who are working on trying to fit those two goals of an energy union and decarbonization together have been trying to figure out the best way to move forward. And hopefully we will have some answers from this panel. The energy trilemma has been based around energy costs, security, and decarbonization. There have also been a great focus by the European Union to look at industrialization as part of that trilemma. We have an opportunity to solve the trilemma, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk about that. To transform and finance well-needed energy infrastructure improvements. In fact, we'll be hearing from RWE. We know, and the IEA has indicated, as have many other power companies, that we need to invest in energy infrastructure anyway. So how do we ensure that some of that investment is smart investment and also decarbonized investment? We need to look at grid developments, distribution, transmission, storage capacity. We also heard again the debate on interconnections coming from Šefčovič when he indicated that he would like to have the distributors actually talking across to those that are talking around transmission, etc. But we also have a clear goal of creating jobs and growth. So to be successful, we need to look at Europe's indigenous supply, and clearly we've had discussions in Poland around how does a country who has most of its energy source coming from coal, how does that country transform and still maintain jobs? We have to talk about demand management solutions. Part of the 2030 Energy and Climate Package, which was focused on having a greenhouse gas emissions target as an overarching target, also had underpinning a renewables target of 27% across the EU and a non-binding energy efficiency target. Energy efficiency is not sexy, and that will be something that we will talk about as well. Even though it's not sexy, it is the greatest option in many cases, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, to actually change and decrease actually the demand for energy. So very much an option for Europe. Finally, one of the key opportunities that we have is to actually find and inject new capital in Europe because we have a new energy plan. The question is, how do we keep investors in Europe? We've heard from a variety of the energy-intensive companies that we've been working with that there's investment leakage, that they're looking outside of Europe. We have issues around energy costs and energy prices, because we have competitors such as in the United States who have cheap gas and who are exporting cheap coal to Europe. How do we compete on the international market is what a lot of these energy-intensive sectors are saying, and why should we stay in Europe? So we have to find ways to keep the energy-intensive sectors, the manufacturing sectors in Europe. We have to find ways to keep investors interested in Europe, and we have to talk about a new future for Europe, which includes innovation, research and development, and new technologies for Europe, while maintaining jobs, growing jobs, and increasing competitiveness. To do all of this, there clearly needs to be the development of a transition plan. And some of the work that we've been doing at the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group, but also through the Cambridge University, has been to talk to different countries across Europe and companies about what type of transition plan do we need to put in place. So I was asked to set the scene. I hope that sets the scene. I truly believe that actually, yes, we can grow in Europe and we can go towards green, even though green is not always the best word. We overuse sustainability now. I think we're overusing green. So let's say this is the new low-carbon energy plan for Europe. It makes economic sense. The new climate economy report that came out just recently, looking at the global implications of investing in decarbonization across the world, has actually shown statistically the importance of doing so and how it can actually create jobs and growth. I would like to start off our debate and conversation, and I hope we will have also an interactive conversation with all of you, with our representative from the European Commission. And Maria Veronica, you are working directly on the carbon markets. I don't think we need to get into the technicalities of that, but how do you see the carbon markets stimulate growth and jobs and competitiveness in Europe, and stimulate part of what we were saying is necessary to make sure that we actually keep investment in Europe and that we keep actually the manufacturing sector here in Europe?
Well, yes, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here because I think it's very stimulating nowadays to discuss about growth and jobs, and that's really what we need. So since I do work on climate issues in Brussels, I think it would be probably good to put some reflection on the latest big decisions that the European leaders have taken at the end of last month. I think the last so-called climate energy package for 2030 really puts Europe back on track for putting energy and climate issues in the heart of growth agenda. I'll try to explain that because I know that it doesn't come naturally, but on the other hand, I think Europe has been playing a leading role in this, and we here in Europe, across Europe, including Central and Eastern European part, have a great potential to continue to do so. So Europe decided to use market forces to fight climate change. How does that go, you will say, because it's not so easy to put these two together. However, in Europe, we do have a system which is called emission trading system, and that is the system that basically puts price on carbon, which means that for every ton of carbon polluted, we would need to factor in a certain price. So that brings me now, why do I think and why do I believe that this policy has its place in future growth and jobs policy? First of all, this policy will generate important investments here in entire Europe, and in particular in this part of Europe, in Central and Eastern part of Europe, even more so. What kind of investments do we need? We do need investments in energy sector. I think that has been mentioned also earlier today. We do need investments in energy efficiency measures, and I think here again you can easily see the potential for local jobs, for SMEs being involved, and potential also, particularly in this part of Europe, for capturing that possibilities. We need investments in R&D, in research and development, and we do need investments in new technologies, in the development of new technologies for manufacturing sectors, energy-intensive sectors, and we do need also deployment of these new technologies. So my first point would be that these policies would bring and should bring more investments in the years to come to Europe. My second point I will try to make is that these policies would bring innovation. What kind of innovation? Innovation that would go in the direction of using less energy, using different energy, using cleaner energy, using energy that we can produce here in Europe, energy that can also add on our energy security. I think this is also one of the very relevant questions for across the Europe, but particularly even more so for countries that are dependent on one or very few number of suppliers. So with the renewables potential in Europe and renewables agenda in Europe, I do see that we need to go also, and we should go into the innovation for that. And that brings me also to industry. Also, if we go, and we are going to go ahead now with ambitious targets, minus 40%, as you said, Sandrine, for a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990. These are ambitious targets. But for doing that, we would need to have breakthrough technologies. And that, again, would need to generate investment stimulus. It would need to bring European innovation potential on the surface. So that's my second point, innovation. And my third and concluding point would be the international dimension. And I think that was very eloquently and very well made already by the Prime Minister, and I'm here only to somehow reinforce his point, because I think, you know, the call for fighting climate change is really evident. I don't think I need to repeat the compelling evidence that was put forward by 2,000 international scientists. These were not EU Commission scientists, these were not EU scientists, that were scientists coming together in the framework of the UN body, and they were sending very, very strong signals to all policymakers across the world, not only in Europe, that the action needs to be taken now if we want to really prevent the catastrophic changes in the atmosphere. So this Europe took very, very seriously and has been doing so for last 10 years or so. But also, I think, very importantly so, we are not alone. And just recently, even yesterday, I think, yes, we were witnessing an important announcement that came forward by the United States and China, the two biggest polluters in the world, telling us that this is the way to go, that we need to come together on a global stage. We need to act together. And Europe also is playing its leading role in this context. And what did United States and China say in their statement, among other things? They said that action now can bring innovation, can bring growth, and can bring other benefits. So I, for myself, would like to see Europe playing a key role in this process.
Thank you. And I think you've conclude with a point that I wanted to make regarding China and the US, because we are continuously told by industry and by others and those governments that feel we're going too fast that the rest of the world is not following our leadership. And I think this is a perfect example. Now you have to translate, obviously, what that accord is. And I've been looking at it because we had that conversation last night. And what I found actually fascinating is that if the US continues on the trajectory that they have promised, they will reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. We have indicated in Europe that we want to reduce by 80 to 95%. So actually, we're pretty darn close. Now, we need to understand what peaking means in China, not Peking, as in Beijing, but Peking. But still, I think that it is quite a fundamental change in the dynamics and a very important one. this leads us nicely to you, State Secretary, and to the conversation, as I said, that we had yesterday, which was fascinating. And I think that also your Prime Minister made a very clear point around the fact that the 2030 package was a good balance between leadership and the desire to maintain growth. And Slovakia has played a very key role in ensuring that actually that growth element is still looked at as very important, and maintaining also industrialization and ensuring that we can continue to industrialize. What are some of your thoughts regarding, again, that balancing act? And what do you feel in order to move now into the implementation of the 2030 package we need to do?
Yeah, thank you, Sarni, also for setting up the stage. And I'll try to somehow put some answers to your trilemma, and it's even bigger task than dilemma. And it basically goes down to the three elements: so how we decrease emissions, how we preserve the competitiveness of industries, and how we secure the energy supplies. And I see that there might be like three approaches in the EU. First one is a bit idealistic in a sense that we would like to be leader in global decrease of the emissions. And as you said, that some or messages coming from the US-China dialogue were quite encouraging, but of course, devil is in the details, so we need to have a closer look, but the message is positive. Secondly, of course, there is a political and economic must that the governments need to secure the stable, sustainable deliveries of energy for the companies, for the citizens. And then thirdly, also we need to also implement this realistic approach. It means that we need to be smart and that our economy is not undermined by our goals, which are not compatible with the goals of the competitors. And I think that what the summit did 3 weeks ago already was to find this balance in these three approaches. And we managed to have quite a good deal, which is just the political framework. We need to develop it further, and that's now ball is a bit in the court of the Commission. But I think also that Europe is very heterogeneous from this perspective, and coming from Central Europe, of course, we understand that countries are different in terms of the riches. So there are richer and poorer ones, richer who have more space for investments, innovation. There are countries which have different economic structure. Example, Slovakia has 22% of the GDP coming from manufacturing. If you add up construction, it's 30%. Average in the EU is 15%, and UK, Denmark, it's barely 10%. So, of course, it has different impact on the economy as such. And also, for example, the conditions for renewables are different. You know, sun shines a bit differently in the south, and wind blows differently near the sea than in Central Europe. So we need to respect it and to somehow define the package according to these conditions. You know, sometimes our countries, I mean Slovakia, region V4, Bulgaria, Romania, are labeled as not such ambitious countries, and that's right because of these conditions. And also, I feel that what Mary Veronicas was talking about, the opportunities for growth via, let's say, our climate energy policy, it's not that well understood here. It's rather seen as a burden. And this message didn't get across yet. Secondly, but I would like to stress that at the end, also our countries, our region was able to subscribe to this 40% emission target. And we are in real terms delivering as well. When you look on the table of the countries which decrease their emission intensity, which means that how much you emit per GDP output, so then we did quite a good job. So average in the EU in last 20 years was a decrease of this energy or carbon intensity by 2.5%, but in our countries, in Slovakia, it was 5%. So we are also coming from different starting point, but catching up quickly. So it means that also modernization of industry is taking place, and also we are investing, and the companies are investing. It's also good that in the package now we have these new funds which are designed to help the economies, the industries. It's good that this new NRE fund will also include also industrial innovation. So, for example, the companies like US Steel could benefit from that. And also that there is a specific fund for countries which lower GDP per capita, and as well that could serve for energy efficiency, for innovations in the energy sector. But what I would say would be also critical in the next phase, and how to boost the innovation, but how to boost the investments, is how we will deal with the revenues from the auctioning of the allowances. Because whether that will be somehow recycled and going back to the economy via various, let's say, national funds, or whether they will be just put into the general budget and not much innovation will take place on that basis, because that's where the real money will lay. Of course, everything depends on the carbon price and so on, how much we will get, but I think that that's the important source for further modernization. And now, as I said, the decision of the leaders was just a political framework. We now need to develop it. Commission should now come with the more concrete proposals, and sitting or in preparing our EU presidency 2016 immediately, then the control eyes blinks, and I'm pretty sure that that would be one of the big topics for the second half of the 2016, and maybe to finalize the legislation or to really have it more advanced. So maybe just for the beginning, okay, I think that for the energy we will come back in more details in the further rounds. But
I just have one question,
okay.
and maybe Maria Veronica, you can chime in here as well. Fully agree regarding the auctioning revenue, and actually member states should be tagging that revenue and creating a pot, as you have done here in Slovakia, from what I understand from you, in ensuring that that money actually then is reinvested into the right projects, etc. How do we juxtapose the over-allowances that we've allowed again, or the possibility to have similar allowance structures, for example, for Poland energy companies, within this thinking of maybe we need to tighten up the market, and we actually need to create scarcity in the market in order to hike up the price? So I think, again, the package that we've agreed to is a package that was a good deal because it did build in a great deal of flexibility for some of those countries that felt it was necessary to do so. But I do worry about the investment signal, and I worry about the scarcity of the allowance and really allowing for the market to work. Do you feel that the MSR will be able to solve that? Sorry, we're going to have to untalk jargon, but is there a system that we can put in place to ensure that we actually are going to be able to hike up the carbon price, to then stimulate the investments that we need, and also to ensure that you get the revenue? Because now the price is so low that you're not getting a lot of revenue anyway for your allowances. Do you want to start first on that?
Yeah, if I may, I can start with this, perhaps. Yeah, I don't want to be as too jargon-like
No, it's a little bit difficult not to
I
be.
will explain, I hope, in a kind of a simple manner. As I said, we have a carbon market here in Europe, and what happened in last few years was that we had economic recession here in Europe, and that led to market oversupply of allowances, since we are putting allowances on the market through auctioning, and that was done in a regular manner without having possibility, because that was not in the legislation, to take into account the situation in terms of demand in the market. So where we ended is that we are now in the situation that allowances are now oversupplied, and as Sandrine said, we have so-called MSR proposal, which is Market Stability Reserve proposal, out there for discussion with European Parliament and member states. And that mechanism, Market Stability Reserve, is designed in such a way, in such a structural way, that would tackle now this immediate issue of oversupply of allowances now by taking gradually certain amount of allowances from the market, those allowances that are not needed for compliance. And then this structural measure will stay on also for any future situations that we had to assign a so-called demand shock. So what we aim at with this is actually to make EU ETS, EU emission trading system more robust again and bring it back to its core value for climate policy, and that is bringing this price signal, bringing the signal of market cost to investors in the market. I do believe that with this structural proposal called MSR in Brussels, and I hope you understand it here in Bratislava as well, with this we are going to give again a full potential to the EU ETS, being a robust instrument to deliver on carbon emissions in terms of investment signals, because emission trading system currently fully delivers on environmental objective, which is reduction of emissions. But what Peter said is also that the EU ETS, emission trading system, through allowances, is used also for a certain extent to use certain types of mechanisms or take certain amount of allowances and put them in special fund and use that money then nowadays for innovation in renewables, deploying innovative renewable projects and CCS. And in the future, as leaders instructed us, that a fund should be also available for industrial partners. And that is, I think, very important to have in mind that, of course, the price matters, how much money you will have in that fund.
Yeah.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure, you can.
And you would probably guess that I would comment on this one. And I think in the past, when we've had these kind of discussions, we get way too technical, and the half the room that's left, we'd lose about half more if we had a real technical discussion. But I think you said an important point, and that's signaling investors based on a market stability reserve that's predictable. And that, I think, is an important issue, because what happened in the last couple of years, where there was an intervention in the market with the backloading measure, doesn't signal a predictable future market to potential future investors. And if we're talking about investment coming in from the outside, that's a key issue. And I think the industry, getting back to the 2030 package, I think the difference this time is that there was a collaboration of all the interest that wound up in a package that was a much more flexible, a much more balanced package. And I give, we criticize the government a lot, and we may do that a little bit more here, but I do give Prime Minister and Minister Giga and the V4, the Central and Eastern European countries, credit for making sure that industrial competitiveness was brought into this discussion and that it became part of the package going forward. And I think that what we see now with the structure of the Commission and Vice President Šefčovič's responsibility to coordinate actions across the regulatory scheme. So it's not just climate. We talk climate, but then there's environmental policy, there's the regulatory policy around REACH and other things that have been, for the most part in the past, silos that don't connect. And I think this new structure, with a two-tiered structure with Vice President Šefčovič as the energy union leader, pulling and coordinating those things together, could lead to more confidence. And what we have today is not a structural economic problem. We have a lack of confidence. And it's a lack of confidence in the economy. I think there's some lack of confidence that some of these problems are solvable. And if we want to invest, or if we want to attract investment with current businesses, whether that be industry, SMEs, innovation, and if we want to continue to be an attractive place, not just Slovakia, but Europe in general, to attract investment coming into Europe, that's what's going to be important.
So, George, since you took the mic, I'm going to leave it with
Sorry,
you.
Thomas.
No problem.
And just
I add
ask
to
you,
that.
Exactly on that. What do you think now probably is the next step in terms of implementation with regard to the 2030 package? There's been a great deal of pushback from some of the energy-intensive sectors, indicating that any climate legislation is costly, that actually it hikes up energy prices. You're sitting next to an energy producer, so you guys can bicker afterwards. But I think that we've done a lot of work with the energy intensives, and one of the key, the work that we've tried to do is twofold. One is demand management, and how can we actually bring the energy intensive sectors into the entire energy system, firstly. Second is long-term contracting. How can we figure out, because obviously there's some pushback now at the European level also in terms of long-term energy contracting and pricing. And thirdly, how can we also work with the full value chain? So start to bring in some of the positive things that the energy-intensive sectors are doing, like recycling, into the full value chain and regarding the life cycle assessment regarding CO2. This also talks about embedded carbon and all these things, which we are not going to get into technicalities, which you've just indicated.
Thank you, by the way, for that. I think that clearly electricity, but not just electricity, energy prices in general create a competitive weakness for Europe. And if you look at what's happened in the U.S. with shale gas, when you look at the prices in the U.S. with roughly half the electricity price fully loaded, the commodity itself today is less than a third of the total price. So it's not the commodity that's a problem. But if you look at the prices that are double the U.S. and especially in our case being in Central or Eastern Europe, if you look to our east in Russia, the Ukraine, and they're having a few problems right now, but the energy prices are significantly lower. And it's not just electricity. Natural gas is a big issue, 3 times the cost in the U.S.
Although the price is going up. I mean, not everyone's saying that, the shale gas revolution is not going to continue to have cheap shale for a long time. But
so far it has.
Yeah.
I go with the facts. And we know that things are not going to change overnight. But a comprehensive policy that I think is a European-wide policy, and I know you may argue about this, that creates competition, there's some connectivity, and drives energy efficiency, I think is a great place to start.
Before we, okay, I'm going. Oh, now we're getting good.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on the energy prices. I mean, if you forgive
come in
me,
on the energy prices, and then I have
trade
an
you
issue on
a few
competition.
minutes, of my time maybe.
We're going to start bartering on time.
On energy prices, some of you know we have done a major study. We have looked at 100 and odd number of installations where we try to assess the real prices they're paying. We didn't get them always, but I think we got closer to then when you have aggregate, and that was the energy intensives. And one of the points was very evident, huge differences across Europe. We expected differences, but what we found was beyond our expectations. Okay, that's one thing. That has to do something with the internal market and how governments twist and tweak their energy policies and prices and subsidies and all this. There are people who know better than I do. But the other point interesting is that, of course, there are huge differences across the sectors. We should not just look at, say, hey, this is energy intensive and this is it. Some of them are very little trade exposed. It has happened from what we found that Italian tiles simply seem to be not affected by low-cost imports. They were okay. Now, one interesting part was aluminum industry, very electro-intensive. There it was clear, the story is crystal clear, either they have long-term contact, access to cheap electricity, or they have no future. I think that was crystal clear. Now, on steel, very interesting. Now, you may disagree, then we can have a discussion. Now, on steel, one of the issues is that the margins are low. Yes. So, steel is not that, is energy intensive, but not comparable to aluminum. Now, of course, if the margins are low and you add on very little, this hits you. But if the margins in Europe do not recover on steel, then we are lost in the first place. So it's not the climate policy or social policy or whatever. It is really we need to get back onto the margins. And I think this is really the big message as well for the Commission, for the new Commission, for Commission President, when he talks about jobs and growth. This is important to get their margins to have space to deal with climate.
Yeah, and then again,
energy
you
policy.
haven't mentioned the chemicals industry, but the chemicals industry is not electricity dependent, but also natural gas dependent.
Depends, yeah.
And does depend, but and their margins are much higher. So we see that there are companies that are actually doing quite well in Europe, in particular in Germany, and I won't name which one. Speaking of Germany and a large energy producer in Germany that has other operations elsewhere, Thomas, what do you think about this? And I would like you to reflect a little bit also about the German energy Wende as well, which has been a very interesting case study and doesn't apply necessarily across the rest of Europe. And the fact that you are now one of the largest importers of cheap coal from the United States.
It's perfect to hear about a country where it's even worse, I know. So, but I would like to start, what I don't like too much is this general euphoria and mixing too many things up together. Yeah, so if we are talking about creating jobs, because I impose some restrictions or I impose some troubles and people are going to solve them, I'm not sure if the overall balance is positive. Yeah? Costs go up, trade goes down, welfare goes down. Basic market principles. Yeah? And this argument, if I have to invest somewhere and people are doing it, so this is good for the economy, is basically never true. It can be true for one market. The wider the market is, the effects are zero or negative. But let's face it, carbon reduction is a social political decision, is something Europe at least agreed on, and we have to do it. Yeah? It creates costs. These costs are a burden, and we are fighting to have the right instruments to tackle that. I believe that trading mechanisms are the right thing because it's somehow close to market. Where I would warn here, every time you feel it's not sufficient to meddle with it. And here I'm with my main message. If you have a stable instrument, give it time and leave it stable, because what we need is some kind of security. Yeah? We need a stable environment. We need conditions. Our investments are most of the time long-term. Yeah? So we need somehow the security that the conditions will not change. Yeah? Market conditions change anyway. Yeah? Then the next thing is about regulation. Regulation is fine and necessary in a strategic sector, in monopolies or in situations which are near monopoly, but you have to do them very carefully. Yeah? And if you now take the Slovak Republic and Germany, and one thing what they face together, that we have renewables, which are supported with subsidies. The subsidies are definitely too high, meaning that there are a lot of installations, commodity prices on the spot markets are very low. Overall, energy prices, which the customer faces, the big ones and the small ones, are too high. So what I love, it was Šefčovič today announced that will tackle is to look at the whole market, to look at it in a holistic way. And also we face security issues, not to bore you too much, but in eastern Slovakia we know that this country has the east of the country has perfect development potentials, but you need infrastructure for that. So roads are one thing, the next thing after roads will be energy. We invested the last 10 years something like 400 million, and I would say the electricity net is now nearly comparable to Western Europe, and in some years to come we will have catched up. But what does it mean then? Market provides disturbances and we adapt to it. You mentioned energy efficiency is not sexy. Basically it is. We are starting about offering products to mass market customers, how they can save energy. So we help them that our bill to us will be lower. But it's an additional business for us. It's a win-win situation if we do that properly. So new developments are fine, but in a positive way, that they create new possibilities.
So you, there's...
I was just going to add to that, and I think you made an important point, and I may have said it earlier, but if you look at steel, I'll pick steel as an energy-intensive industry. In Europe, it's also the most energy-efficient steel region in the world, and some of that's been driven by the environment here, the price points and that kind of thing. But a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked, so now you're talking about more significant investments, innovation, research, cooperation, and that has to be a collaborative effort. I think it's important that funding is channeled to that effort if there's an expectation that the energy efficiency is going to improve. I think it's important to look at this life cycle analysis. If you look at steel, it's 90% recycled. It's the most recycled material in the world. So you really have to look at the carbon footprint of the whole value chain, not just at an installation. And that I think is one of the things that's missing.
I think you're right, and I'm going to bring you in, State Secretary. I have a question actually for you, and also, George, you brought up competition. And I was recently, a couple weeks ago in Prague, and I was amazed at the discussion that we had with the renewables sector and the energy efficiency sector and the power sector. And what came up systematically, and I'm going to say it because we're supposed to be controversial here, is corruption and incumbents, especially in this region. So I would like us to reflect on that, because interestingly enough, in Rio, at the largest industry discussion, when we were talking about sustainability and investment across the world, the number one issue that came up for most industry in terms of moving forward, innovation, et cetera, was corruption being a barrier. And I was confronted with it again just recently. How do we deal with that issue? I'm not sure it's a Slovak issue, but it is definitely, if you look at incumbents, it's an issue in Poland. It's an issue in the Czech Republic. It's an issue across the region. How do we open up the market? Because we've been talking about markets, so let's be blunt. How do we open up the markets? That includes the power sector in these countries.
And maybe coming back to the issue of the prices, because everybody gets energy bill every month, and that's quite understandable. And we are in the strange situation now in Europe that the wholesale prices went down by 40% in the last couple of years. Gas prices are almost the same, but still we have twice, 3 times more the overall price what the customer pays than in US. We are not as bad than in Japan, but of course we are rather looking on the US example. And it leads to the situations that, for example, in Slovakia, we have closed, or the electricity company closed one of the state-of-the-art gas power stations because it was not efficient, it was not profitable. And we are reopening the coal power plants, which is completely against our, let's say, emission goals. And when you look on the price, I'm not expert on that, but as I understand it, then you have the basic price of the product, and then I think 8 different layers of additional taxes, contributions to that fund on nuclear decommissioning, coal subsidies, or whatever. And I was quite appalled when I saw the latest figures about I think it was done by the Commission, about the overall amount of the subsidies which goes to the energy sector, and the number is 122 billion a year, which is more or less the size of the EU budget, or size of the investment package we are preparing now under Juncker's 300 billion for 3 years. So it's really huge, and most of it goes for the subsidies of renewables, I think like 40 billion a year, and still coal, mid-nuclear. So I think that this subsidy system, I heard you as well, that it's too big, and we need to do and reform somehow.
But I think there's been a call to get rid of all subsidies across the board for all energy, not just renewables, because it's a problem. We are subsidizing coal, we are subsidizing nuclear. Look at what's just happened in the UK. You know, again, I think, and the IMF is now trying to get rid of subsidies, in particular for coal, as well, in terms of their loan agreements.
Yeah. But on the energy, and I think that the answer how to solve the issue of security and prices really lies in the developing of the real internal market of energy.
Yeah.
What means it's infrastructure, because I was also amazed when I learned during the negotiations on the climate package, and we discussed also the interconnections and the targets for that, that Portuguese and Spanish or Iberian Peninsula is linked to the France just at the level of 3% of overall capacity of their energy sector. So it's basically nothing. Here in the Central Europe, we are much better. I think that the ratios are much more higher than 10 or 15%, which were discussed. But it shows, or another example, the Baltic states, their grid is still somehow controlled from Moscow, and just now they are laying the first cable from Sweden to, I think, Lithuania. So that's very strange, and you know, at this stage of development of the EU, these are the situation which needs to be addressed, and I think that we are addressing that, but it goes very slowly. Gas sector, of course, we are the most vulnerable part of the Europe, depending on the one supplier. Of course, we are working on the north-south, linking the LNGs and so on, but it will take as well time. But I think that the good thing is that we are starting on that. But also, the other thing is on the regulatory framework. It means that when we even have cables and pipelines, that really the electricity and gas flows, and that we open up our national markets. And here, I think it's also work is going on, but a lot of work is ahead.
It
So I
needs
would
to
say
be,
for
yes,
Vice President Shevchevich, there is a lot of
So Christian is wanting to say something.
Yeah,
Thomas, did you want to say something too?
on this as well. You know, I think we have been having this discussion for 25 years, opening up national markets, and we're still discussing this. I think this should give us a bit of food for thought. Now, we still don't have an interconnector between Spain and France.
And
after
it almost blocked it at 2032.
And we had to have a European Council discussions about an interconnector between Spain and France. I think it's very interesting. Now, we don't have an interconnector between Belgium and Germany, and Belgium faces 99.9% certainty this year blackouts. You know, why is all this? Because governments, you know, have an interest or seem to have an interest to protect their incumbents. 25 years. I think we should just see this and not sort of continue with the same proposals, the same stories as before. We will fail again. Now, here I think that's for me the interesting part, and maybe if you allow me, I could get back to the energy union, which is in the title. I think the interesting part of the energy union is that because of all the problems you have identified, which everybody deplores all the time, we have now possibly new momentum because we have put together the old EU 15 agenda of decarbonization with the competitiveness issue of industry, with the security of supply, infrastructure, and solidarity. Solidarity is in the treaty in at least 2 cases, and one's related to energy. So I think this is a really something, suddenly there's something in for everybody. So there is a huge political momentum. Now, that will not be forever, and in the last session we had a discussion on a window of opportunity that can close very, very fast. That's, I think, the best bet to do something on this, that we really drive infrastructure, also do something about the market. You mentioned this, energy prices, and therefore also unlock the decarbonization or the low-carbon economy.
And you create
really, I think that,
security
if you allow
as
me this,
well.
I think really important to keep this energy union
Yeah.
together. And here is a criticism to you. You put it down to green and competitive. Without the security of supply, solidarity and infrastructure, it won't fly. That's my
Absolutely. No, I wasn't putting it down to green and competitive. I think that
Who
energy
did?
security. No, I think that energy security is absolutely part of it. If you look at the United States, what has driven their investment in renewables and actually in low carbon energy? It's been energy security. We've never actually used that as the reason to start to invest in decarbonization. It's been our climate legislation. And now we have the possibility, as you say, to bring in energy security and to make it a stimulus for actual decarbonization. And it's coming at it from a completely different issue. And if you look at gas, look at Bulgaria, 100% of the households in Bulgaria are dependent on Russian gas. It's a no-brainer if they put in energy efficiency in the households and try to reduce their gas consumption, their import bill will be dramatically reduced. That's an energy security and a win in terms of decarbonization.
Yeah, but don't forget innovation in that same vein.
Definitely.
I mean, what happened in the U.S., and, you know, we've got lots of plants in the U.S. We have the plant here in Košice. The energy security issue and the national security around energy dependence was a big driver in the 70s with the oil crisis and things like that. But what's driven the reduction in dependency in other regions of the world was innovation in the gas and oil industry, in the shale gas. And there were movements at that time by environmental organizations to take that off the table. And what they did is work together, found safe ways to explore with unconventional drilling and fracking and things like that. And they've unlocked a weapon in industrial competitiveness there through innovation. And I know that in this most recent discussion here on climate and energy and things like that, there's a much more open discussion around shale gas potential, which probably isn't as big as it is in the U.S., but it can be a piece of the puzzle. It can be, you know, part of the potential reduction of dependency on natural gas coming from places that may not be real stable.
George, I think you bring up a really important point, and before maybe opening it up, maybe I can ask you, Thomas, where do you think that kind of key innovation or revolution is going to be here in Europe in the energy sector? If it's not around our resources, and we will have some shale, but obviously the innovation is now coming from the United States. Where are we going to kind of unlock that?
Maybe give me a wider space. One thing what I would use the opportunity to look at a different problem. If we talk about security of supply, this is for one thing not to have to buy from the risky guys, be it Arabia, be it Russia or whatever. I basically still believe in trade, and if somebody is doing something good and has something to sell, we should buy it and not try to do it on our own for higher costs. But okay, security of supply is an issue, but I have a second thing with security of supply. So we will have the renewables now, so basically wind and solar, and they create another problem, yeah, that we will have, if we don't change the system we have right now, that there will be no conventionals in the market anymore, because they are not competitive, at least in this system of support. And then we will face the risk of blackout. Yeah? And this is the issue of these capacity markets, that we will not only have to pay for the commodity, but for the capacity in the market to bridge that. And here again, this shouldn't be solved individually, because then you create islands of energy, or islands of countries of energy systems in Europe, which then will tend to protect itself against others, and we move away from this common market, which is interconnect and lower costs. But here we need a European solution. And this was also announced by Šefčovič as a topic, so we are looking forward to see what comes out there.
Okay.
And innovation, one last thing to innovation. I think you can't order innovation. Yeah, you can give incentives, yeah, and then the industry will invest, will have creativity, will use opportunities, yeah. Just to innovate is not so easy. Yeah, you need a framework, and then leave it to the market to develop that.
Mary, Veronica, did you want to say?
No, I fully agree with the last point that, you know, we need a framework and then leave it to the market. But I think there are certain cases where market cannot, we certainly expect the bulk of the investments coming from the market forces. Let's put it like that. And I think that's obvious. And with this predictable framework, which we are now aiming at here in Europe, I think it's also helpful for investors to understand where we are going at. But then you have certain challenges that cannot be solved only by market forces. I mean, there are the good cases why, for a certain while, we would still need public finance support for certain, you know, type of innovation breakthroughs, perhaps. So that's the combination that we see. Certainly market, but for some time we would still need to have. And that's why in the package, 2030 package, we have several mechanisms for that. I'm not going to go in details.
You bring up a good point too, and Christian, you wanted to comment, which was, and I'm often actually stumped with the question from several Central and Eastern European countries and governments who say the only reason that you want us to move towards renewables and energy efficiency is so that actually we become dependent on technologies from outside of our region and outside of our countries. And they very much push the homegrown solutions type of element. And yet we've seen in Germany and we've also seen in the UK that actually many renewables countries or companies have actually gone out of business. Some of the solar panel companies have gone out of business, but they've made business on the services side, on the technology side in terms of engineering solutions, and they've also drummed up a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises around the solar business. So they're not necessarily producing the panels, but they actually have all the support services, etc. So as you indicate, there are different ways in the value chain to be part of the value chain. You don't have to be the producer of the final good.
May I comment on that? This is a little bit for me a camouflage, yeah, because this was what Merkel promised to the country. Yeah, you will face for a certain time higher energy costs, but it's worth the cost because we are going to be the leader of renewables in the world, and it will come back, and will not come back in that way because of course others are fitter in producing that, and this is why these producing companies, even if they were the first, went out because they are too expensive. And so let's face that if the state plans economy, it never works. What the state can do, if it's a good state, to provide a framework, to provide conditions, to provide incentives, but let's not plan the outcome. It never works.
So I think that's exactly the point, is that you have to allow for a variety of different types of parts of the chain to actually function, and it may not necessarily be the large producers. You may be importing panels from China. They'll be cheap, but then all the services will go around it, which aren't German, Polish, Slovakian, whatever, Czech service companies that are actually servicing that.
And I would have a last comment because you mentioned something which wasn't picked up too much. It was the corruption issue. And again, I have the feeling the moment you have somebody who dictates solutions, there is a way for corruption, because or for lobbyism or whatever you call it. It doesn't have necessarily be to the illegal solution.
That was off the record, I guess.
The moment you have market solutions where the system is open, this is less accessible to steps of shaping the system.
You're absolutely correct. Christian?
I would just do, this innovation is about technology, yes, but it also can be in regulation and in services, as you mentioned. I think it's interesting now to watch what's happening in Spain, where they have the first time auctioning, I think next week, on demand response capability. Now, that is of course a step forward that might, first of all, stabilize the Iberian grid without having extra generation capacity, so fairly cheap, and it gives the aluminium producer an extra source of revenue, which is much more welcome than, free allowances or anything else, because it's in the market. If this is really worked well, there is extra revenues coming out of the electricity system. Now, that's not necessarily always good news for the generators, but, we all are talking about competition, but that is something happening. So, there is things happening.
Absolutely. Okay, so who would like to jump in? Good, we've got two questions here.
Thank you. Josef Badida from energy analyst from Energie pre vás website from Slovakia. We are all trying to get to this climate agreement in 2015. That's the point. That's why we speak about all the ambitious plans here in Europe and our leadership. But the truth is as well that Australia just dropped its ambitious CO2 trading system. South Korea postponed it. Who knows whether once they will? You could tell it better, but they haven't implemented it yet. The same happened with, I think, with the Japan. They had really ambitious plans, but nothing realized yet. So how should be our climate policy driven by this international environment? Because we cannot really stay in a bubble, I'm sure. And everybody thinks about this. But what if other will join us, will not join us? Maybe it seems now that USA and China, they made this breakthrough, maybe agreement, but as Mr. Javorčić said, it depends on details. It seems maybe it's very fashionable, it sounds good, but who knows what will be the future and how will they implement it, what will be details at the end. So how should be our climate policy driven by this international environment? Maybe business leader can tell us, and also Commission President do more. Thank you.
Mary Veronica, you want to start?
Shall I start?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think thank you very much for this question. Indeed, I think it's very pertinent also to understand what's going on in action, in concrete action around the globe. Of course, you know, I think, first of all, let me say that international negotiations are of essential importance because that is the process that keeps the entire international community aware that something needs to be done. And let's hope now that in Paris we will have a good and solid outcome. But I will come now to your questions, trying to picture what's actually going on. It's quite a lot going on. Sometimes here we in Europe really believe in our little bubble, but also from the perspective, well, it's just us doing things, which is not really true. First of all, as you said, Korea is going to introduce emission trading system from January next year. We just had Korean colleagues over last week. They had also a very tough discussion with the industry partners, with the society, but their leadership decided to go ahead and they're going to have their emission trading system, which kicks off next January. So now I will stay in the region because I think it's very important to understand that China also is doing quite a lot domestically. You have now you have initiative where they put in place 7 pilot projects with market approaches to address reduction of carbon emissions. And these are running pilots running in provinces, but provinces of size of Germany. So you see, China is big, and when they start action, they start there with a quite good planning. And so they started with pilots in province, and they are now also studying their national emission trading system. We have a lot of cooperation also with China as well as many member states, because we do think that using market forces for addressing carbon challenge is very, very important. And we are ready to share our expertise and also our knowledge, because we had to learn a lot by doing here in Europe with other partners that are also embarking to the same approaches. And what China is doing right now, they're preparing their national carbon trading system, which for the first draft, they say they should be ready even by the end of this year, beginning next year. So let's see. I think, forces are moving also outside Europe. Then you have California, for example, and others are also looking in potential approaches, such as Mexico. So I think, of course, here in Europe, as I said, we have chosen a market approach as an approach that would prevail for the industry installations. It's over 50% of emissions that we would like to capture by that system. But it's not only that. It's also energy efficiency measures. It's a lot of cars and CO2, we call it in Brussels, which means to put a standard for the CO2 reduction for cars. So we have several other measures in place, which are also in place in other places. Cars regulation is very strong in the US as well.
And also now in Asia.
And now in Asia. So I think there is action going on. But of course, I shall say we need to be more ambitious to really come to the objective of 2 degrees, as we called it in our language. So I think it's important that we do keep in mind the global process, but also not being complacent that nothing is going on beyond Europe.
I just, because I think you directed that question both ways, I would just add that there is not a bubble when you look at the markets that, I don't pick an industry, it doesn't matter. When you look at the markets, we don't have regional markets today. It's a global marketplace, and that's why the level playing field discussion comes up a lot. And I think that's why in the finally agreed upon package for 2030, there's a recognition that if there is no global agreement, that the targets can be revisited. You know, I don't know if the average consumer in Europe really knows or cares that there was 10% less carbon in that particular washing machine or refrigerator that they purchased. They want value. And if we don't provide the value, then we're going to see jobs and industry move to regions where the rules are not as specific, and that doesn't help the world. That doesn't help the world at all. So that level playing field is very important, and I think there's a recognition of that.
I think they do care in terms of products, though. For example, if they're more efficient, and that has been one standard and one label that has really started to change consumer attitude towards products, because obviously efficiency will save you money. So it's both the value proposition and the durability proposition, but obviously the saving of the money is key. There was the other question here.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the stimulating debate. My name is Norbert Corella. I'm from the Ministry of Environment. I would have maybe two questions, one for the policymakers and second one for the business. As we all know, the 40%, or at least 40% greenhouse gas emission targets represents EU-wide roughly 50 to 50 or 60 to 40 split in terms of emissions delivery EU-wide in trading sector, in ETS sector, and non-trading sector. So for the policymakers, what do you think what we need to do in non-ETS? Do we need a further tightening of CO2 standards to tackle transport emissions? Would you propose further introduction of energy performance standards for the housing sector? Or you would perhaps leave it, you know, to the member states only? And to the business part, perhaps a question related, as we all know that we will need to get into implementation phase as the leaders endorse the overall target. So what for example, Slovakia would need to make sure in order to preserve the competitiveness of the industry, or let's say energy intensive industry, and at the same time spur investment and innovation? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Maybe I also briefly come back to the question of the international context. And I think that I hope and I think that we are a bit wiser than in 2009 before the Copenhagen summit, when the EU came with the strong leadership role, but unfortunately nobody followed. That was the message out of Copenhagen. This time I feel that the environment is a bit different, and what Mary Veronica just explained, that how other countries are working on their, let's say, targets, on their mechanisms, gives much more hope before the Paris. So, and also our approach is maybe more, not that robust in terms of, let's say, sending just messages, but on concrete action, what we would like, how we would like to decrease the emissions. And also I think that the context of the international negotiation will need to be taken into account when we will design the concrete package, and also in the Council conclusions, it was decided that we will once come back to the whole package based on the assessment what was achieved in Paris next year. So there is a direct link between the global context and what we will be doing in the EU. Because it's obvious, I think it's 7 or 8% of the whole emissions are coming from the EU, so the rest comes from the outside. So of course that's critical. And on the non-ETS, here I think that the deal what was found is balanced in a sense that the country, the national targets will be divided according to the GDP capital, so it means that there is more scope for the non-ETS sectors, which means transport, buildings, agriculture, for the countries which need to grow or there is more growth potential. So I would say that was quite fair balance. And of course, how to achieve that, we don't have any market mechanisms. We need to go through the regulatory process. And many things are in place already concerning the transport, concerning the buildings, and we will need to work on that basis.
Do you not in Slovakia have already kind of a predisposition towards certain sectors? Like I know Bulgaria, for example, will very much focus on energy efficiency in households because as I indicated, it's where kind of the low-hanging fruit is. Is there something similar here in Slovakia? Is it more the transport sector where you feel you can really make a reduction or maybe not, and maybe it's just more balanced across the different sectors?
Of course, you need to do efforts in all sectors. That's inevitable. And in transport, mostly it's more, let's say, horizontal, and there is maybe less possibility for action at the national level. So because the standards are usually done at the European or global level, just take the cars, and but still. In the energy efficiency of the buildings, I think there is a lot of scope, and I dare to say that we are doing quite a lot. And just you look around at how many small projects are implemented. I was many times feeling that much more than in the Western Europe.
Okay, thank you. And Mary Veronica, would you want to add something?
Well, just briefly, because I think it was already brilliantly answered by Peter, but I think it's a very important point because we need to recognize that all sectors need to contribute to that effort. And that's, I think, very, very important because sometimes, you know, the impression is, well, just industries asked now to do the big deal of things, but it's true that in economy-wide we have other sectors that also would need to contribute to reaching climate objective. And as you said yourself, agriculture, transport, energy efficiency are probably at the forefront of that. Now, what exactly we are going to do with these sectors, I think it will be a combination of both, probably. I mean, it's too early to say, for me, what exactly, you know, we are going to propose from Brussels. But certainly, I think it will be a combination of things. Let's take, for example, Lithuania or Czech Republic or France. They use all revenues from auctioning, from ETS auctioning that belongs to member states, for energy efficiency measures domestically. So there is a variety of possibilities, and I think, of course, both measures will play its role, and certain ones are more suitable, I would say, for the European approach than probably others. So I would see that would be probably the general direction of things.
Are we moving now to the
Yeah,
industry?
I think the question had to do with action. And I think you made a great comment earlier that there is I think a very narrow window of opportunity. And I think everyone understands that change takes some time, and we have a new commission, we have a new structure in the commission that has a real opportunity to seize the moment and turn policy and, you know, what I think is a very collaborative environment that we have today into action and restore confidence that the processes that are in place can produce results. And that confidence can lead to improvements in the economy, people willing to go take out a loan to buy a new car. It could have a catalyst effect and create a snowball. But action, I think, is the important part. And I think your question was more specific to, you know, what's happened in Slovakia. Slovakia was the first member state to adopt the so-called Steel Action Plan. And it calls for some steps to be taken that we are anticipating be taken. But the effects of the Steel Action Plan, which was generated at the EU level and endorsed by the Parliament at the EU level, won't just affect the steel industry. It's this focus on energy prices, how we move ahead to a better place. But action, I think, is important. So there's a lot of good dialogue. There's a lot of collaboration today. I think there's a coming together in the middle, but now we got to take that and create action from it.
Thomas?
Yeah. I have the problem that, thank you for this very good question, because there's, I think so far, no good answer for it. And again, I'm not happy with all these anti-liberty measures. Yeah? So if you have, so what is the right instrument? You own a house, yeah? And should you now be forced to insulate it? Maybe a 300-year-old house, very beautiful. Somebody will be completely happy to sell you these ugly things you put on the house, and maybe in 20 years it's gone because it changes its structure and so on. Or should be the target more to educate you how to do it smartly, yeah? And here are maybe things to come. We don't know so far. We have now these smart home activities, and you maybe heard about this Nest thing, which learns how you steer the energy consumption of your house. It's a Google product, yeah, and it's very fashionable. And there will be things who solve it, and I'm not happy about forced dictated measures which are, according to the technical status quo, done by people who in the worst case know not too much about it, don't know about the other possibilities. Yeah? So I still believe in setting the right incentives to have the passion and the creativity of the people to offer and buy the things who lead to the desired outcome. Yeah? And fantastic example is the light bulb issue across Europe, and you hear a lot of comments about that. Something this saves, I don't know how many generation plants. Other things, it helped only the industry selling bulbs. So far nobody wanted to buy. Yeah? So this is an issue like that. I don't have an answer to it. Yeah? So I couldn't say use this instrument and not the other. But I would be extremely carefully that we keep a kind of liberty as consumers and are not regulated as well in our individual behavior, what we have to do and how we have to live.
I think you bring up
So,
a good point about creating a balance, and I think that also what you see in other countries is there's also a lot of technical standards that are actually driving change, not necessarily regulation. And I think there's some learning here in Europe around that as well, where we need to not only think of having just regulatory instruments, but there are different ways to stimulate innovation, to stimulate change, etc. Christian, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to reconfirm or make a similar point. In the current energy efficiency discussions, we treat all energy the same. Just imagine in 2030 we're going to have about 50% of the energy of the electricity is going to be renewable, and we will have lots of days and weeks when we have excess renewable energy. So I think, why do we need to save it? You know, the energy efficiency doesn't then make not so much economic sense. Just these small things I think are important to be kept in mind. For energy efficiency on fossil fuels, of course, very important. On the renewables, we should be discussing.
And I think that's about building flexibility in the system as well. You're absolutely right, because that's essential. Storage, also, you know, there's so many different elements that need to be looked at, which is the complexity of the issues that we're confronted with, of course.
We're risking there's a lot of value in these chains, and we're risking by over-regulating to losing that value.
Yeah. There's someone right behind you who would like the microphone.
If I may add some comments to new innovative solutions to get some additional new energy, but from the space. I heard futurists said that in time from 2 to 3 decades, the mankind can generate solar energy from the moon. When you encircle the moon with solar panels, the air is there much, not so dirt as here on the Earth. So the energy from moon solar panels will be much cheaper, one. And second, we can transform this energy through the microwaves to the Earth. So this is the non-traditional new approach to the energy, and the futurists say that it is technology, from the technology side, it's feasible. So plants already are here. The question is, where are the finance from this global project?
I think it's a good question, and it comes back to breakthrough technologies. But also, I have a question for our policymakers, because there's been some aversion, for example, to CCS from some policy districts. And the pushback on CCS is, oh, this has been looked at for such a long time, it's still not cost effective, why are we still talking about CCS? And if we invest...
Want to explain what it is?
Sorry,
CCS.
carbon capture and storage, apologies. Which is also a technology which is being offered, and some would say is the only possibility to really work, in particular with high carbon energy, coal plants, but also in industrial sources to reduce emissions. How do policymakers, and this is something that I think all of us are struggling with, those that are with institutes, those that are actually on the industry side, how can we ensure that there's the right knowledge exchange and the right understanding of what the different types of technologies are and how you actually base policy around them? Does it come back to creating the level playing field? I mean, I have my own answers, but I'd like you both to answer. What do you feel is fundamental in order to ensure that those breakthrough technologies can exist and somehow get help without picking winners? Because that's the key issue.
You know, it's always like with technologies. You can actually invent almost anything, but don't ask how much does it cost. And that's probably the issue for these moon solar panels, but also for the CCS pretty much, because, okay, technology is here, we know how to do it, but still, what are the costs? And I very much recall when we were creating this first climate and energy package, and we have this first fund, this NER, which was supposed to support the CCS technologies, and I believe that certain projects are implemented. But to be honest, I don't see much results. Maybe the time is too short because we started in 2008, 6 years. Maybe we need more time. But still, there is a lot of doubts about the viability of the technology, and my question mark is whether it's not the dead end, you know, going via CCS. Because there is also one additional element, not just the cost, but the political acceptance. And for the CCS, it's quite questionable.
Well, actually, very much along the same lines. Well, I bring in price signal, because I think, company needs to have business case in order to be interested in developing certain technologies. And I think we should face it that, currently we have not given these signals through our market system to the market that these type of projects are going to be so essential, and I think they are going to be essential if we go towards the 2050 roadmap, that that companies would see the business case for investments. And right now, as Peter already said, we have so-called NER 300, again, nice Brussels jargon, but it's about 300 million allowances that were auctioned on the market for the purposes to support renewables deployment and so-called CCS, carbon capture and storage. And originally, actually, when we're discussing that fund was originally first, when the first proposal came on the table, was meant for CCS only. Then renewables came in. What we have now is basically that we have 39 projects from renewables group and one project, White Rose, from UK, being partially, financed also from that source, so-called CCS technology. So I think price signal is very, very important, and surely also the public acceptance. I think we have issues in certain member states. I know that in the Netherlands, the very, very intensive discussions are going on. So these are all elements that certainly contribute. And also, well, the steer that we have received now from the leaders is that in Europe we are going to continue to try to bring this through support of the NER 400 in these next 10 years. So let's see, but just to add, perhaps that in the United States, Canada, and also China, they have also quite important projects related to the CCS. And as far as I know, in Canada, they put in place one very important large CCS.
But
Maybe
I think, just to add to that, though, I think the jury is certainly still out on CCS. I know that when one of the states in the U.S., I won't mention any names, tried to specify capture and storage as a winner in the technology selection for converting coal-fired plants, the environmental groups stepped up and say, oh, wait a minute now. This is not necessarily something we're endorsing because the data, the research hasn't been done. On a small scale in pilots and trials, I think we'll learn, but on a large scale, to pick a winner, as you said, I think is pretty questionable right now with a broad public opinion.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask each of you for a quick comment to this question in order to conclude this session, because what we have before us is the challenge of setting up an energy union. We've talked about a variety of complexities regarding setting up an energy union, and I know that several of you have indicated also, let's not forget that we are talking about member states who typically have always talked about the sovereignty of their energy, and here we are trying to bring all those member states together under an energy union. We're confronted with an energy security issue regarding the Ukraine, and many have said that there will be blackouts across Europe, not only because of the Ukrainian situation, but also it's been said that some member states are going to be particularly cold because of the Ukrainian situation during the winter. In addition to that, we're trying to set up our 2030 package, and so we're confronted, as Vice President Šefčovič very clearly indicated, with trying to both put in place the right implementing legislation for the 2030 package and start to discuss the energy union, and he would like to fast-track a proposal for January 2015. So if you were Šefčovič, what would you focus on in that proposal? And give me a very short answer, please. Mary Veronica.
It's hard to me to answer because he's my boss.
Well, not off the record, because we're definitely on the record with lots of people are tweeting.
No
You
tweeting.
know, it will be tweeted.
Be very
It will be
careful.
tweeted. Be careful. Huh?
You could go and speak to your
That can
boss.
go into my promotion, but okay, I try. Because I think there are two elements which I would certainly concentrate on. First, well-functioning internal market. That is, for me, number one priority short term. If I were him, I would certainly go for that. And at the same time, I think discussion on vision has to start with member states now. And that is about security, about low carbon, about our future energy union. So that
Okay.
these are my
Excellent.
views on that.
Okay?
Yeah, I said it also, the internal market, the
Yeah.
fully functioning, and in particular focus on the infrastructure, because it takes a long time, so if we want to have some delivery in reasonable time, we need to start now.
Absolutely.
Because it's an European issue, and I think Šefčovič is very charismatic. Yeah? So I think the solidarity and transparency issue is something where we can have a footprint.
George.
I think it's important not to try to quick fix one thing. That, you know, this is a complex issue, and it would be very easy to try to fix something quickly to get a quick win and then cause problems in lots of other areas. So, you know, I think some thought around how the energy union will work, the coordination of the different portfolios that'll report up, but the high energy prices and energy dependency has to be tackled.
Yeah, use the political momentum that there is at the moment and use it fast, but the solutions will take time. I fully agree with you. The three priorities: bring the power sector back to investment economics, absolutely crucial, without forget it. Get the second, the infrastructure, but use it not just for both for the internal market, but also base it a lot on solidarity, security of supply, which will undo the political blockage. And the third, it's already on its way, deal with the carbon market and the CO2 price, and that's it for the time being, I guess.
Great. Well,
And a
Yeah.
global settlement in 2000.
And a global settlement. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed this panel as much as I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so we're going to stay here and welcome our closing remarks, which will be given now.
Thank you very much. Don't worry, I'm going to have just a 40-minute speech. No, I'll try to be very brief. First of all, thank you for the moderator and panelists, not only of this panel, which has been very, very wonderful, and new breakthrough ideas came here as the solar panels in the moon that I never heard before, so it was good as well and fun. But in the last 3 days, we discussed very important issues of the growth of the future of Europe. And as Mr. Asmussen said yesterday, it is showing that this conference is sending a clear signal that 10 years after enlargement of EU, the EU is not old and new. And when we are discussing the future of Europe here in Bratislava, it says that we want to have a clear contribution into what kind of Europe we are living in. So I hope the TATRA summit has succeeded also this year. And when I look into the list of participants, that were 500 participants from more than 23 countries, businessmen, leading businessmen, not only in Slovakia, but also in the region and in Europe, I think that we have created a very good base for the future TATRA summits as well. And we have a very strong and important mission for the upcoming 2 years, because we are going to have the presidency of the EU in 2016, and we would like to build up a strong brand from TATRA Summit as a key conference during the Slovak presidency. But when we were establishing this conference together with Ambassador Korčok and Ambassador Kačer, both who are here in this room, 3 years ago, we did not imagine that we can build up a brand in 2 years. It's the 3rd edition of TATRA Summit, but we organized it in 2 years. The first in Bratislava, second in Brussels, the third here again in Bratislava. And I think it is only possible because of the dedicated team that we have and that learned a big lesson during the GlobSec conferences, the 10 years of GlobSec conferences that we have established. And the beauty in our organization is that we can combine great ideas, huge ambitions, with the ability to deliver and the ability to organize and implement those ideas, which is very important. So first of all, I would like to thank for the team of CEA, Center for European Affairs, Andrea Ferencikova and all the others. Please stand up, and everybody who has contributed to this conference. All the organizing team, please. There are many more, also outside of the room. Thank you. You have done a great job in the last several months to prepare this very important conference. Also, let me thank to 2 very special persons that I did not mention so far. And it's State Secretary Peter Javorčík, who has dedicated a lot of his energy and time into planning this conference, and State Secretary Vasil Hudak from the Ministry of Finance, who has helped us a lot in setting up this conference. And this would not be possible without all of our partners that we work with. First of all, Ministry of Finance, Bruegel, Guntram Wolf, who has joined us already for the 3rd year. International Visegrad Fund, Slovak Investment Holding, but also corporate partners such as TATRA Banka, Saab, Ernst & Young, EPH, Deloitte, Slovnaft, RWE, Slovenská sporiteľňa, Poštová banka, US Steel Košice, KPMG, BMW, Autopalas. So all these partners has joined in order to craft and shape the debate on the future of Europe. And as I would like to finish with one last quote from Mr. Zavos, who said today that he wishes the TATRA summit to become the Davos of Central Europe. Well, it's Davos. Yeah, that's true as well. It's very ambitious, but those who know me and my team, we like challenges. So, my dear team, you know what we have to do in the upcoming 10 years. Thank you very much, and you are invited for a drink downstairs. Thank you.
It was a good message, the last one.